Welcome to the third workshop of the CENTRINNO focus group. On behalf of the Municipality of Milan and the whole CENTRINNO consortium, it's a pleasure to have all of you here for this third session about circularity. And we are about to start just in a couple of seconds. We will get through the agenda, but before we start, I would like to launch a poll in order to see who do we have in the room today. So if you can just go to the poll and answer the three main questions that we are having. So what type of organization do you represent? Then you want to know if you have already joined our previous workshops, and what is your main priority from these meetings. We're really curious to know who you are and what brought you in here today, and what raised your interest in joining our meeting today. So let's just take a couple of minutes for this icebreaker, and then we can move on with the remaining of with the start of our presentation and program. I see almost everyone has voted already. So please don't be shy. All right, we have a couple more minutes before we can stop the survey. I think everyone has already voted, so I can end the poll, and you can also see the results. 23% are from a local authority or an urban authority. Again, the same number coming from a university or research center. 31% from an NGO or a civil society organization. 1% from an SME, and 15% from Fab Lab. Most of you are joining for the first time, and so we are very happy to have you here and welcome, but also welcome back to those that joined the previous session on social inclusion, as well as to those that joined, to the two people that joined the two previous sessions. And your priorities, I think they're quite balanced, but wanting to know more details about what we're doing in terms of circularity within our project. And you would also like to network with like-minded colleagues, but I also see a few are interested in how to replicate their approach in their local context. So this is very good from our point of view, of course, because as you know, one of the scopes of our focus group is indeed that of validating an uptake and providing information on the uptake of the CENTRINNO project and approach. So now I think we can really start with the presentation, and I can go, and I'm already controlling this presentation, so I can go to the next slide with the agenda. And as you know, like this focus group originally included 41 registered members. Now we've increased a bit this number, and we have a broad composition from representatives of Fab Labs, local authorities, NGOs, private companies, university and research centers, and many more. We're running through 5 different workshops, each focused on one of the key concepts of CENTRINNO. So we've been discussing about heritage, about social inclusion. Today we focus on circularity, and then in the fall we will discuss about vocational training in September, and then in November we are going to have our last event about the general concept of the Fab City Hubs and their application in CENTRINNO. So as I was anticipating, we aim at disseminating our activities and results with these workshops, but we also would like to hear from you as experts, as qualified experts and stakeholders in the field. We'd like to hear your feedback and input on what we are doing, and to somehow validate our concepts and our tools, but we'd also like very much to inspire other stakeholders to adopt our approaches and our tools and replicate them in your local context. And then, of course, it's just a matter of the list, but we also want to learn from your direct experience, because we also think that it's a two-way collaboration. So we can give you information, share what we have been doing, but we also want to learn from your experience, what you've been doing, how we can build synergies and have peer exchange on the topic. And so today, we are going to move forward to our first presentation about circularity for all makers and their role in circular urban ecosystems, that will be delivered by Franz Ritter and Eva Proms from the Metabolic Institute. And then we're going to dive deep into very interesting pilot case studies from the 9 pilots of Centrinno, that will be Amsterdam and Milan. For Amsterdam, we have Sofia Almanza and Theo Kösters from the VAG organization. And from Milan, we have Lia Trogel from the Municipality of Milan, along with Zoe Romano from the NEMA network. And then we are going to have panel discussions with our pilot representatives, as well as with Franz and Eva, as we call them concept owners, as they are those that are working on the conceptualization and implementation of the whole concept of circularity in Centrinno, of the cartography, and all the tools that they will explain you afterwards. And then after the panel discussion, we will open breakout rooms, and we will try and engage you into interactive exercises on Miro. And then we'll convene again in a final plenary to share our views and comments, and to wrap up the meeting. All right, I think that I can stop here, and it's my pleasure to give the floor to Franz Ritter to introduce the.
Thank you, Pietro. Hello, everyone. Also from my side, I'm going to quickly share my screen. So bear with me for one moment. Okay. Do you see my screen now? Perfect. So first of all, maybe a word about myself, so that you know who you are speaking with. For those 70% almost who are here for the first time, that's amazing. I'm Francie. I work for Metabolic Institute. We are a research organization and also consultancy in the Netherlands, focusing on systems thinking and circularity. So this is I'm really proud to be the circularity concept owner, and hope can bring this closer to you today too. So as Pietro already said, today we will be focusing on the concept of circularity, but we had the thought that it might be nice to focus this discussion a little bit more on one specific topic, because circularity is very big. So what we will be talking today is mostly the question of how can we integrate makers into urban ecosystems, into circular urban ecosystems. So really, what's the role of small producers within a circular city? And for those of you who know Centrinno a little bit, we like to start with some heritage thinking sometimes. You might, for those of you who've been there last time, heritage is one of the other really big important parts in Centrinno. And that's why I thought, why not start with 2 small stories of circularity from pre-industrial times in cities. So the first story, to kick this off, brings us to London in the 60s. And you probably know that London during that time was a very thriving and booming industrial city. And one of the industries that was very common and present in that day, that was growing a lot, was the paper industry. With the new technology, people could print books very quickly, and there was a huge demand for resources to make paper and newspapers and books. And this is how one of the most maybe filthiest or undervalued resources from the urban poor suddenly became very important. You had these rag and bone men, as you can see here on the picture, walk around the urban working class to collect rags, like old textiles, and bone leftovers from animals to make paper out of it. And back then, newspapers even said it's your social duty to really recycle and create, give the textile rags that you had collected to the industry. The second story, keep this in mind now, the second story brings us to Paris, even 60 years earlier. During that time, if you had walked through Paris, you could see piles of, they call it night soil, which is basically human waste, piled up outside of people's houses. And during the night, special jobs where men were shoveling this into carts and brought it into cesspools outside of the city. This is where it was left. And then farmers were actually required back then around the city to use this sludge as fertilizer. First, this was to improve urban hygiene, But later on, this was actually, it was found that this is a super valuable resource, that human waste, and the prices for this fertilizer actually increased. So what I found really interesting in this little research is that back then there wasn't even wastewater in Paris. The Seine actually was quite clean. Only later on did we come up with the concept of wastewater when we actually had a sewage system. So why am I telling these stories? There are two reasons for this. First is I want you not to think that the cities have been circular back then, because that was definitely not the case. But that back then, when we had circular ecosystems, they were very decentralized. That means there were a lot of different parties that we had to orchestrate and put together into a system, into a network. And the second thing that I want you to remember during this presentation is that what we value as a resource is really dependent on the culture and the context that we are in. So what used to be a resource in the past might be waste now, or vice versa. So with these two things in mind, now we're going to travel back to the present and have a quick look into what circularity really means today for cities, especially in Centrinno. I'm just doing this intro slide to get us all on the common ground of what is a circular economy. So how we define it, it's really the opposing model to the linear take, make, waste economy, in which I always think about that way. We make things that we don't really need from non-recyclable resources, then they break early, so we have to buy more things we don't really need, and we can't recycle the materials at the end. So in a circular economy, how we see it, materials come from renewable resources that can be fully recyclable, and products above all last very long and can be easily repaired and reused. So that's the system as the starting point that we are trying to envision. And it's probably also not news to you, but during the past years, this idea of a circular economy has gotten a lot of traction from cities. There are initiatives like the European Circular City Declaration, where cities actually sign that we are now working on the roadmap to become circular. And at the same time, we have all of these companies, big companies like Apple with their disassembly robots, trying to recover all of the small materials out of your iPhones. And we have a lot of startups that are populating the space of circularity. So there's a lot of buzz around circularity. And of course, there's also still a lot of circular greenwashing and uncertainty of what we really mean by it. But what is really apparent, and now this is getting to our main topic of today, is that the discourse around circular economy isn't really a socially and economically inclusive trend. So we can think about it, who's really profiting from this buzz around circularity, right? We have many large businesses like Patagonia or H&M or IKEA who use the term circularity to, in the end, grow and be more successful. But what about the tailor next door that you already know, or the highly trained woodworker in a city who makes long-lasting, high-quality good, which can be recycled? What about all of these small computer repair shops that we see at every corner? In Centrinno, we are really focusing on those actors because they are often sidetracked by this trend of larger businesses to, for example, develop in-house repair shops or return policies. And it's not only that, it also really takes time and investment to become circular. You might have to pay consultants like us to make a circular business model. And many times the SMEs in our cities don't really have that investment and resources to make that happen. So this is a real problem, because if we are serious about creating circular cities, one of the things that we need to make sure of is that we have spaces for repairers, for makers in the city close to where people live. Otherwise, who is going to do the things that we want to be done in a circular economy? And it's not another aspect that we are focusing on is the idea of skills. We need to really understand what are the skills that we need for a circular economy, and are we sometimes focusing too much on the new and shiny instead of also starting with the skills that we already have within our community. So in Centrinno, we believe that the circular transition needs to be grounded in the skills that we all have already, and then identify the gaps to go further. Whether that is, for example, using a 3D printer to make spare parts, or as simple as hemming your pair of pants. I want to, before I go into Centrino and circularity, I want to maybe propose a new vision of how we think about circularity in Centrino. So we don't see it as a system in which maybe 3 or 4 big companies take ownership of all of the resources in a perfect circle, but we're thinking about it more as a food web. So how can the larger industries trickle down the value of their waste resources to smaller businesses and smaller creators who can use that and therefore be embedded within the circular system. So similar like in London and Paris, what we really want is a system that again gives has a decentralized character to it. Okay, so this was a little bit of the background, and I want to now go further into what's really interesting to us, what circularity in Centrino means and how we have supported them. And the starting question that we have discussed with most of our pilots in the beginning is quite simple, and that is, what is already there? That means, what resources do we already have? Which skills are there? How can we connect local actors on the ground together to learn from each other and to exchange resources very locally? And of course, also identifying the barriers of these actors to be involved in such a system. So one of the tools that we've created within the last 2 years is called the Centrino Cartography. And it is a platform or a collection of resources that help you to map those stakeholders and visualize them very easily on a geospatial map, and then also visualize the connections that could be done between those or that already exist between those actors. We have used this together with a platform called Kumu, which I don't know if you're all aware of it, but it's a mapping platform which links very easy to a spreadsheet, and then magic happens and you see a really nice end product that you can share with your stakeholders. So in a nutshell, the cartography is a process for our pilots to, first of all, map those stakeholders, create what we call resource inventories, which is a question or a survey that you can ask your local stakeholders to identify what they have. That can be as simple as what knowledge, what expertise do you have, what waste streams do you have available, what infrastructure for sharing. And then in the cartography, you can visualize it very well, which can be very useful for communication purposes, as I'll show in a moment. And you can really showcase the existing and future potential of a local circular ecosystem. I don't want to go into the technicalities of how it really works, but I want to just offer a few slides on how our pilots have used it and how it was useful for their own circular communities. The first thing is it really helps in the beginning just to visualize who's already there and what they have. Amsterdam will talk about this in a little bit more, but it can be a very powerful communication tool to already show, hey, these are the circular businesses within your area, or these are the local makers who could still become circular. So the power of a map, I think, shouldn't be underrated in building a community and visualizing who's really present. Other pilots, for example, Barcelona, have first mapped the entire ecosystem around their wood workers, and then came up with hundreds of possible connections of how they could reuse the wood waste from woodworkers. For example, to collect sawdust for 3D printing experimentation, or wood chips between urban gardens. So they came up with a really big scope of possible connections that they are now discussing with their stakeholders. But last, I want to say it's not really so much about the end product. Often it's just about the process. So sitting down with the community members and the businesses to ask them what the resources are, what the needs are. That process to get there is already the basis to build trust, to build a network. And we often get too focused on the outcome, whereas the way to get there is actually way more important. So who's this for? We think this can be most useful, of course, for Fab City Hubs or policymakers, but above all, for people or organizations who are facilitating the development of local circular communities. And the last few minutes I wanted to spend on how you could replicate the Centrino cartography, because of course we took 2 years to do this. So we had to come up with a way for others to do something like that much quicker. And we developed a few tools that can be divided into 3 steps. The first is a few tools to understand your local context. We call it become a local context detective, in which you really understand the high-level challenges in the city. Then we have tools around the mapping of stakeholders, and lastly, tools to find actual opportunities within this network. For the first point, for example, we have a template where you can do a quick scan online, helping you to identify challenges within social and ecological indicators, for example, waste, air pollution, climate. We think it's important to go a bit beyond just circularity as a materials recycling topic, but we have to think about it more holistically, right? Air pollution and climate are also part of the story. But at the heart of our resources are really the replication guide for Kumu. So here we have an easy spreadsheet to use for mapping stakeholders that then can be linked to the online platform Kumu, where you can visualize your ecosystem in a live manner, so to say. And there's also a replication guide for you. And then the last point, which I think is the hardest, but also the most important, once you have gone through this process of mapping who's there and what they have, how can you then come up with some sensible ideas of connecting resources and creating the so-called circular synergies or bridges, right? We have a few support tools for that. We had made a case study library of circular business models, as well as a library of all of the ideas that we came up with in Centrinno. They are mostly community focused, so they aren't very technical in the sense that that it's more approachable for a Fab City Hub to do it. We also have just the results again that you had come up with in your mapping, and a few exercises what you can ask yourself. And with that, we hope that you can also take inspiration and find interesting opportunities for local communities. So that is it from my side. And for the next, I think I'll pass it on to one of our pilots to really discuss in detail how they have addressed the topic of circularity on the ground.
Exactly. Thank you very much, Francie. It was really good, precise, and inspiring presentations. And I think our guests will take a lot of inspiration information from here. And now we pass it over to Amsterdam, to our colleagues at the Fab Society, Sophie Almanza and Tia Kuster. So please, Amsterdam, floor is yours to present your case study.
Yes, let us take control.
Francie, big compliment on the presentation. I really liked it.
Thanks.
Now we should be in our presentation. Yes.
Yes. So first, to present ourselves, we work together with HMC. It's the College for Woodwork and Pakhuis Zwijger Debate Center in Amsterdam and Zwijger Future Lab, of course. We're together in the pilot. This is our pilot area. It's Amsterdam North, but actually during our research, we concluded that we should focus on the whole of Amsterdam, but still we get all the interesting stories, and our network is in Amsterdam North. Oh, it doesn't work. Sorry. So our goals to future circularity for our makers in Amsterdam North is actually a policy lobby, strengthening the network of makers during organizing a lot of open workshops, the visibility of makers to a wider public and reappreciation, so that it's visible for people what makers do in a city and why they are important for circular goals. It's actually what Francie also just told in her presentation. We do that by mapping the makers. Joe will also show that later in the presentation, and by CENTRINNO schools and education programs on just talking to each other on what is important about circularity and how you create it. So our storyline, oh, sorry, het gaat helemaal mis. I don't know what happens. It's creating a new narrative, and we do that by exhibitions and a lot of events, public events, but also smaller events with only the important people from the network. The lobbying with and to the municipality, so attracting local politicians, but also people who work in the fields in the local governments, and prototyping for formal and informal learning courses.
See if it skips through. Yes, and then the big question is actually what does that all have to do with circularity? And I think, Frenzy, you explained it very well in the previous presentation. So we're going to just reiterate your words in a slightly different way. But this is really the important step that we made here in terms of why we think you have to first talk about all the other stuff before you can talk about circularity. And that's making that network, making these base conditions happen before circularity can be there. So making sure that there's a stable space for makers to actually root themselves into their environment, to be able to invest in their materials, in their connections, in their trust in the city, to create these spaces that really have to embed them, because that takes time, takes effort, takes an investment, and to create a space so that they have a permanence there and create that knowledge. And these are all preconditions to become circular. And as you said, indeed, circularity can be a lot of a buzzword and can exclude a lot of makers that have been traditionally working with quite local materials, quite things that are around them, but maybe not exactly circular. But we really believe in our pilot here that these are the people that have the capacity to become circular and are an essential part of being that. So that's why we address circularity sort of sideways, but use it as a way to say, okay, we're inviting them, this is our goal, but you don't have to be circular as a maker to join what we're doing. But there needs to be an ambition that we want to better the city and make a city for the future, and circularity is part of that. So it is that kind of game. And here's a bit of an example of what we do in these preconditions to become or to come to that circularity. So it's making the makers visible, showing what they do and what is important, and showcasing that making is not only woodwork, it's also laying electricity cables, being a car repair shop, it's being your own maker at home, and having kids be motivated by being makers. So that exhibition was a big part in showing the breadth or the wideness of what a maker can be and valuing that. But we do a lot of community events to connect those makers, and you see that connections are created there. Like a welding table or another material can be transferred from one maker to another. So these connections really help in having their own network be broadened. And we host knowledge workshop in which we take a topic and discuss that with makers. What do they find important? But how do you become circular? How can you actually share your tools or your materials in a way that works for you at the moment? So really attaching to the current themes and things that they hold close to discuss and to explain. That's one of the central parts of what we're doing. Next to that, we're really lobbying and saying outward, these things that we take up and the things that we see and hear, we explain that, because we really think Amsterdam has a good ambition to become fully circular and have no new raw materials coming into the city in 2050. But to get there, we need to have some big steps and some big changes in how we organize the city. And we want to be the intermediate to figure out, together with makers, together with the people that actually have to do it, these steps on how to create that. And that's where we're hosting a lot of events to talk about it and see what's the reality of this now at the current moment, and how can we actually become circular. So we're posting op-ed pieces in which we explain that, and in which we knock on the door of the municipality to actually say, hey, how can we either help or how can we agendize this more, because it's needed very badly. Oh, I have to go one back. Yeah. And we launched this Tuesday our own Maakschap Amsterdam, which is a sort of a collective of our organizations together with multiple organizations of importance in North and in the whole city, in which we say, what do we stand for, and ask makers or individuals or other organizations to attach their name to and underwrite this message. So that's really part of that lobby, and where our first building block of how we can become circular is made. And Frenzy already showed it. We are really using the Kumu and this mapping to showcase, hey, where is actually the problem? What is actually pressing? So there's quite a lot of makers and people still see them, but about half of them will leave within the next 5 years and have to find a place probably somewhere else. So it's a big loss of this network and the things that are already there. And also to showcase that narrative of a maker is not just a singular maker, but it's a web of connections. One gets the material there, uses a bigger machine of another company, and there's quite a lot of exchange happening. And so you can't just transplant makers and say that they do exactly the same. So there's quite a lot of physical exchange. Next to that, we're doing other public events and talks with makers. So it's a big mix of raising awareness, seeing where it is, and talking with makers and policymakers and bringing them together, and not just talking to one party only. And lastly, if we want to have makers in the future, we have to educate and get them enthusiastic now, because otherwise we don't have the people to become circular, because it needs a lot of hands and a lot of good work. And it's fun. So we're really trying to see how can we revalue practical education in primary education, in high schools, in other places, and that we create a lot of projects together with, for example, the Technasium. In 13 schools, we had 800 students participating, seeing can they collaborate with makers in their neighborhood and in their space to figure out a new circular product, really to see where are these makers in the city. This is our last point in this, that you have to start from young, you have to start in the politics, and you have to start in the local and with the people there. So that's all this sort of basis. And then we go to what can become circular. And that's actually our next step in also a pilot. Can we make those connections? And then Barcelona is a very interesting example of how that might happen. And that's, I think, where I leave you all. Here's an example of our schooling project. And then we're at the next presentation. So this is our last slide. Thank you very much.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Theo. Thank you very much, Sophie. Very interesting and inspiring to know all about Amsterdam. And now we move to Milan. So my pleasure to give the floor to Liat Rogel. Please, floor is yours.
Thank you, Pietro. Hi, everybody. Thanks for being here, and thank you, Francie and the Amsterdam team. Request remote control. Done. Okay. So now I have the control, but okay, thank you.
I think it's about to go full screen.
This is a secret question we have for later, so we'll answer it later.
Bugs with the.
Shall I stop it, Flavio, before you? No, okay.
Let me check. It's just bizarre that it went out of the screen, but give me just 1 second and hopefully we manage.
Let me get out of the remote and then.
Yes, and meanwhile, Liat, you want to introduce yourself?
Yes.
While we fix the technicalities.
Perfect. Yes, so I'm Liat Rogel from the municipality of Milan, and I'm the project manager of the pilot activities from the municipality of Milan. Together with me from the municipality, you can also see Serena. And pilot activities in Milan are managed in collaboration between the municipality and a private organization, which is NEMA. From NEMA, you can see Zoe Romano. And Costantino Bongiorno is also connected. And so together we are, responsible for this last 2 and something years to the activities bringing circularity in the city of Milan. And I will explain you how we're doing it and what do we mean by circularity. I will, okay, yes. I can continue in the meantime, it's no problem. So as you know, Milan is the capital of fashion and design. We host the most important events on fashion and design, Fashion Week, the Design Week. And the city really has its name and reputation with fashion and design. Our department in the municipality of Milan is the urban economy, fashion and design. So there is also, let's say, a part of the municipality that is really responsible for this topic. And one of the questions that we asked ourselves in the beginning of the CENTRINNO project is how much really from this fashion and design field is actually produced in the city, and how much of it, how much of the waste that we have from consuming fashion and design is going outside of the city without regaining, let's say, new life. So for us, after some time thinking about these challenges and opportunities, we decided to connect the idea of circularity with the concept of the 15-minute city. What does it mean? It means in this 15-minute city, I can reach many services in 15 minutes. It could be the school, the park, some shops, but very often it does not include places that produce or repair. So we decided with the CENTRINNO project to really focus on how to integrate production, reuse, recycle, upcycle in the texture of the city. So we think about how physical and digital places could promote forms of circular production in the city neighborhoods. And we focus on the field of fashion and design as a starting point. Then this could lead also to other fashions. And our aim was to involve businesses and communities through research, training, networking, and support to the entrepreneurship. Yeah. I'm trying to move on, but I can't do it. Oops, what happened? Flavio?
I will try and back up with my.
I can share mine if you want.
Here I'm back. My PC just crashed in worst moment.
Yeah, you can take control of my screen.
Of course I can. There you go. Okay. So now that I have control, let's see that I can really move things.
Or you just share your own screen, so okay, now you are.
Okay, so yes, I am, but then everything moved at the second. Okay, there you go. So yes, the fashion and design, that's our starting point. I'm suffering this a little bit. No, this is the video. Okay. I will be patient with technology.
Pietro, are you sharing the screen? Because I see as a
I'm sure
As
the funny part is that we actually rehearse all the presentations before the meeting. But maybe it's best if you just share your own screen, Liat. So it's
let's do that. Let's just do that. Okay.
I mean, the fun part of when you're going live is that you get something unforeseen happening to like animate the presentations. But I'm sure Liat will recover and restart from where she left.
There you go.
There you go. Said before, so please.
Okay, so not only fashion and design, but also circularity means working together. This was said also by Amsterdam and also by Frenzy, meaning that if you want to begin and circulate some materials around in the city, you need to be sure that the stakeholders get together and network. So this was really the starting point, activating and enabling local small producers towards a more circular manufacturing. And this is what we did from the first time. And I'm going to give you some information about the methods that we use to do that. because this is really, you know, the aim. And this is the funny picture also because everyone wears masks. It was really right after there was a small opening in after the lockdown to begin and do some events, and this was our first event after the lockdown. So we can speak about the bottom-up policy making, meaning that we start saying who is there and already doing some things. Let's discover what is going on and let's speak with people so that they can become part of policy making. And so we can speak about organizations and the inclusion of different organizations in the process of Centrinno. So since it is a joint effort, it was important for us to gather different types of organizations, which could be the makers, different kind of producers, the citizens, of course, the public administration, and so on. And we did this through open calls and through community work. What are open calls? For example, whenever we organize an event, we had 2 big events in these 2 years. We don't invite specifically, but we create a call with a vision and with a description, and we ask people to contribute. So people contribute not only by coming, but also by bringing their own content to the moment that we meet each other. Then we have a more engaging kind of work, which means really listening and creating roundtables with local and micro small enterprises. And we use some tools, also some tools that Francie showed before, for example, to understand what kind of materials they're using, what kind of materials they have as waste, and what would they need also from other organizations or from the local organizations to become more circular. So it's really about workshops. We had 2 main working groups, one related to textile and another one related to the neighborhood level activities. And then as well, we are using mapping. So to map the stakeholders becomes very important. We also have a very nice Kumu map by now with our stakeholders. It's you can see that. Maybe I can ask Zoe if she wants to put the Manifattura Milano website into the chat. That would be nice for you to see how we are connecting everyone. And this gives mapping gives visibility and also gives visibility of each other. So as the producers, I can look around and see other producers that are near me. And then we have a line of activities, which we call show off and connect, which are some events that highlight these projects during existing events. So for example, the Design Week in Milan, which is very famous, we created a guide that can put you in contact with the producers that are circular producers. So we're not doing something new. The producers are already there. They're already showing their work during the Design Week, but we create a guide for circular design. Then some examples that are useful also to know what we speak about when we say a circular design, a circular production in the 15-minute city. So on the left side, Superforma is a maker space, and they started to reuse their own waste of 3D printers to create objects. We had a residency with them and with a designer that produced new objects from this material. And now they are working on how they can gather more waste from 3D printers. They do it already from a local university and from some other Fab Labs, but how to scale is quite difficult, also because they do not have a permit to collect this waste. So they need to create very special connections with the other organizations. In the middle, you can see cups that are made from, again, with 3D printing, but with coffee waste. This startup started collecting coffee in local cafes in a specific neighborhood, which was a very nice activity. Unfortunately, again, this was not really legal, because in Italy, if you don't have a permit to collect waste, it's not only in Italy, we hear about many, many European cities where this is the case. You cannot really do it on your own. And this is a challenge that we are discussing together with the community. The last one, the third, is a tote bag made from used hotel sheets in Milan. So it's a quite high-end hotel that gave the used sheets, which are from a very high quality cotton, and they were sued by a social suing place, and we used them during a Centrinno meeting. So this was a way to show how you connect different actors and stakeholders to create something out of waste. And I wanted to also say some things about the challenges, because it's not all easy. Last February, we held a very big event that was called Milano Circolare, again, through an open call. And there we had about 100 producers that came to exhibit what they're doing in fashion and design in a circular way, or participate in talks, or open their workshops to the citizenship. And this is a way for us to say that Milan cares about circularity and cares about local production. To end, the city of Milan is now working on a circular economy plan for the city. So this is a strategic plan that will then hold for some years in the future. It's part, there is a part dedicated to fashion and design, which we are working on. And this is done also in collaboration with other departments of the city, working on food and working on the built environment. So another way to enhance circularity in the city is also to give it a direction, to give it a vision. And this is in this case done both in local activities and by developing a plan. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Liat. That was a really comprehensive presentation, and apologies for the technical issues that, of course, happen also to the most perfect presentations. Now it's the time for a panel discussion. So unfortunately, we don't have we cannot invite the speakers on stage, but I can virtually invite the speakers. So Franzi and Eva from the Metabolic Institute, Liat Rogel, Tia Castells and Sofia Almanza, as well as Zoe Romano. Please sort of feel to be on the stage and join me on this virtual stage for 15 minutes of a panel discussion. So the way we would like to have it's very interactive. So we would like you, the participants, to raise questions in the chat. So please, if you do have any questions for our panelists, please write them in the chat, and then we will speak them up on your behalf. But we can also already start with a trigger questions while you think of further questions. And from what I've heard, there are a few key recurring words among them. The general conceptualization of circularity in Centrinno, as well as, of course, what it's been doing at the pilots. And these keywords entail the skills, the development of an innovative skill for circular economy, the mapping, then getting to know the resources, the people, the network. And here another keyword is the web, is the networking, is the interaction and the interconnections of the materials and then the people, and the local level is really important to be grounded at the local level. So I wanted to raise this a broad question, starting from Franzi, from a general point of view, but then trickling down to the pilot. So how has the cartography helped to identify circular opportunities in this framework? And how is it so important to collect the data through a bottom-up approach? So really to go into the places and get data from the locality. So can you please elaborate a bit on
yeah, maybe I can zoom out first. And what is the alternative in circular economy research, right? Often we start with what we call material flow analysis, which takes citywide data and kind of tries to model of which materials go into the city and then what waste goes out of the city. And we started with that approach in Centrino, but noticed very quickly that for local interactions, that doesn't really bring us anywhere, because it doesn't give us any useful information of what we should be doing. And this is why we really flipped it around and started to just think about the resources that are locally used or could be useful. And hence developed this bottom-up mapping process, in which it's really more about talking to people and developing a better understanding of the resources and resource needs from local organizations that you want to connect. Because if you think about it, what you need to know if you want to divert a waste stream or avoid a waste stream isn't necessarily the entire picture, but you need to find out where that waste stream is, or where is the one actor that you can kind of intervene in. And that's why we think that this process was more useful to be actionable compared to the top-down approach of mapping resources only from citywide, very not so granular data.
Okay. Thank you, Francie. And I mean, I see here there is still like this need to move between scales, because you need to work at the bottom-up level to map, to identify, to create the networks, but you also need to interact with the higher level scale. So maybe how do you take this, and how do you get the information? And I ask you to you, Francie, but then I would also like to hear from the pilots their take on this, working with multiple levels.
Yeah. So I mean, I can only say for how we get that information, we had to sometimes be very flexible and innovative in how to map that resources. For example, as we already heard in Milan, we had workshops, we had a survey that we sent out to people. Other pilots did more of an interview, like a unstructured interview. So we had to find different ways to collect bottom-up data depending on the local situation, because in the end, what mattered is, first of all, building trust of why you are actually asking these questions.
Yeah. And maybe also the local pilots want to complement Sophie?
Well, I can answer that question not per se on collecting information on circularity, but definitely on how you have the different levels, because we organize a lot of things bottom up with the how do you say it, the makers themselves. And for example, last Tuesday we had a really big event more with politicians, and then you feel the tension also between the different levels. So that was really interesting, also because you suddenly speak another language. However, you actually use, or you, how do you say it, you present what you gathered bottom up. So that's sometimes challenging, but I think definitely needed to really make the change.
Right. I mean, the issues of trust is really crucial in getting to work with the communities, in getting them to trust you and give you information that are sensible, and to allow you to share the information they give you. It's a really a big challenge. And I also wanted to bring in Milan here and ask you exactly about this, about the trust, how challenging it is to develop this kind of a framework in a city, in a complex city like Milan is. Maybe Zoe or Liat want to answer on this. How did you make?
Yeah, also I wanted also to comment about the different scale of the material, and then go into this idea, this concept of trust. Somehow you realize that open data, or the data that the city has available, is more related to industrial production or data that is collected and released from a different way of seeing the city compared to what we are looking at the city now. So moving from linear economy to circular economy, it really takes into like, you need to face a new vision on the city. And so you need to start collecting other type of data. And the fact of when we said, when we are focused on fashion and design in Milan, and of course the Milan is known for big brands of fashion and design, but these brands are not producing in Milan. So somehow also talking about small producers that are focused on artisanships, but also like digital fabrication technology, repairing. These are all active like subjects and stakeholders in the city, and sometimes they are not so visible. So somehow it's a game of giving them credit, asking them about also what is involving them in the conversation, and giving them visibility allows us to open up the conversation also, and going deep more into what are the materials that they use, which kind of, if they quantify the material, which kind of material that they would like to use that they cannot reach right now in these conditions. And we are facing a systemic change, moving from linear to circular, and we need to create collaboration between private organization, public administration, and citizens. Because if we do not connect these stakeholders, we cannot move in that direction. And creating tables in which people can know each other and also understand the needs of each other, it's really important to move forward and create change.
Thank you, Zoe. Also, your last comment and your last words give me the access for another question that is really relevant, and in terms of dealing with these challenges, etc. But we are also developing some tools. Say, for instance, the cartography that is a really important tool that's been improved in our pilot activities and in our project activities. But then making a step further, so how can we utilize these mapping tools for policymakers? How can we then upscale this tool and make it a usable tool for city makers, for policymakers to really upscale and foster and enhance this scheme of circularity in cities? I think maybe in Amsterdam and then Milan, but also France, of course. And while you're answering, please, if there are any other questions from the audience, you're very welcome to write them in the chat. We would like to hear your questions as well. So about how we can use the mapping tools for policymakers.
Yeah, I think in Amsterdam, it's just very important to showcase who is there. And we also saw that for makers themselves, it was important because, for example, you have makers who are in an area and they're not visible yet for the policymakers. And they said that's super difficult for us because we sort of don't exist until we are on a map. And that was quite interesting to hear back, that they suddenly had an opening for a conversation with local with local public administration or local policymakers, because they were on a map and they could showcase that they were part of a bigger community. But we didn't find a way yet to see how we can really structure it to be useful for, that's also still a question from our side as well. So I would really like, if anyone has interesting ideas about this, then I would really like to hear it.
Yeah, and I also really, we can I think discuss about this on the uptake on how using this mapping tools in the next session during the breakout rooms. But then there is also a further question building on this one about what can be the broader role of municipalities and local administrations and urban actors in enabling a circular local manufacturing. And this is a question I'm raising to the panelists. But let's also keep this in the back of our minds, because it could also be a key question for the discussion afterwards, because of course municipalities play a role in here, but also all the different kind of stakeholders and actors would also need something from the municipalities to have their work enabled and their activities enabled. So I think maybe Liat can elaborate a bit on what could be the role of municipalities in elaborating in enabling circular systems and circular manufacturing.
Yes, I can answer, trying to give a more general answer from what we're seeing from cities that are developing plans for circular economy. So very often the starting point or the entry point is, of course, the environmental sustainability and how you can make sure that your waste is managed well and that you go beyond the idea of recycling, and you're also trying to understand how not to arrive to waste and how to produce less. Okay, so this is very interesting, and I think that the role of municipality is really to look at its own territorial area. And then, of course, the municipality has also and can have a role of advocator towards regional or national or even European, because many things cannot be done on a city level. No, so there are some laws, legislations that you do not control on a city level. But if the city demonstrate also through the community of practitioner that you need something, and that something is blocking you from innovating and from going to a more circular way of being, then the municipality can act as a bridge toward policies that maybe can even touch laws and regulations. So I think that this is another important role of the city. I think we say that in many projects now that start with the city, that the city is really, small enough to act and big enough to make a difference. So it's an important place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think this is a very good consideration to close this panel session. The role of cities is really fundamental. They are the ones that have the connection upwards towards the regulatory system and downwards toward the citizenry, and it's really the good framework and good platform to enact change.